Well,
Okay.
Alex, so such a pleasure to finally get to talk to you. And
Likewise, yeah. I feel like we already know each other. Yeah.
yeah, I remember you were backstage, not back, well, kind of backstage at the show in Helsinki, Stickman show in Helsinki. That's where I first saw you. I think Leo
Yes, that's
invited
right.
me.
That's
Yeah,
right. I was there on tour, and I came with our bass player, who was a Stickman fanatic. So,
really.
absolutely.
It's it's amazing to hear that. I still can't believe that there are people who actually are fans of what I do, but or what
Yeah.
we do. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, in this, the movie Spinal Tap. They talk about a selective audience.
Exactly.
It's a it's a selective one, but very dedicated. And
Yeah,
yeah, this
exactly.
guy flipped. He got all excited when he found out we were in the same town. And I think he was already trying to figure out a way to go, and I told him, "Oh, I think I have a way for us to go,
Mhm.
and this connection that he didn't know that we had." So it
Hey,
worked out. It
so
was a great show.
thank you. Hey, so I'm not sure if you know that, but a couple years ago, in 2019, there was an event in Holland somewhere, probably in Eindhoven. I
Hmm.
can't really remember exactly, but you were there doing a clinic in the
Hmm.
afternoon, and that was kind of like the first time I experienced you as a jazz player, let's say, or a person interested in jazz and also in uh, in teaching
Uh-huh.
jazz. And it was pretty interesting to see you in that context. And would you consider
Cool.
yourself to be also are you actually interested in teaching? Is that something that comes easy to you?
Yeah, it comes very easy. Actually, yeah, I enjoy it, and I make it a big part of what I do. I do a lot of like online posts
Hmm.
where I like to
Hmm.
teach.
Hmm.
We're working on a book now that's going to come out through Hal Leonard,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I did a couple videos for True Fire,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I usually do a few master classes every year.
Great.
Just did one at Sweetwater, along with Stu Ham, the great bass player.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I enjoy the process. Yeah, I really enjoy the education part of it. I could be perfectly happy doing that as well.
Yeah. You see, I've found out for myself that it's become part of my practicing, my personal practicing routine to also pass pass the knowledge on, let's say, that I've acquired over the years, and somehow just giving it away frees up space within myself to do something else and to go further. And somehow it's sometimes I'm even say like assigning research to students of mine where I'm not even practicing those things that I came up with myself, but I have others do it, and it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to get something down
Hmm.
yourself is to be able to teach it.
Hmm.
Because once
Hmm.
you have it on a level where you can teach the thing, whatever it is, then yeah, that's proof you've absorbed it.
Hmm.
And I think it helps retain the material to be able to pass it on.
Hmm. You know, I listened into the conversation you had with Tim yesterday, with Tim Motzer,
That
and
was really fun. Yeah,
and you said that your parents were in academia or are in
that's right.
academia.
Uh-huh.
Um, what did they do, or what do they do in
Yeah,
academia?
very non-musical fields. So sociology,
Yeah.
you know, sociology as it relates to law
Hmm.
and psychology.
Yeah. Well, interesting.
Both,
So,
yeah, they both
I
have PhDs from Yale. My father's a highly decorated academic.
Uh-huh.
like considered like a giant in his field of sociology.
Wonderful. It's and did how would did that have an influence on you as a human being? I mean, I don't know, it must have had, but can you
Yeah.
quantify it somehow? Like being like knowing that world of academia as a young person. Like I didn't, for example, I did not. I like my parents are pure working class, and I had
Yeah.
no contact whatsoever. Would you say
So
that it
so
had
interesting.
any influence on you?
Um, I to be honest, I was very confused by it.
Hmm.
It just seemed very complicated, because I would meet other kids and they would say, "Oh, I have a parent who is a teacher
Hmm.
or a doctor," some very simple thing, and I just could not understand what they did. Like, what is this? What are social sciences? What are research studies? What are
Hmm. Hmm.
statistics? So I didn't I didn't get it for the longest time, and to be honest, the lifestyle never seemed very interesting to me either. It just seemed to consist of these sort
Hmm.
of faculty events and attending conferences and preparing uh, you know papers and presentations, writing for academic journals. It just really was not exciting. So when music came along, was very exciting, and I think I gravitated early on towards rock and roll, and especially like wild rock and roll, which so heavy metal you could describe as more
Hmm.
extreme, high energy filled music, both in terms of the music and the performance and the whole scene surrounding
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That that just resonated with me. I think that's partly why, because I think there's something about the those who study other people,
Hmm.
that tend to be very unassuming, blend in the background, and whatever that is, whether that's a psychologist or a even a photographer to a certain extent. They tend to be just blending in and not that noticeable.
Hmm.
And I wanted to be noticed, and rock and roll and especially heavy metal, you get noticed, especially
Uh,
once you're old enough to sort of adopt the look
mhm.
and the hair and the other things. But I think it at the same time, as I got older, I think the academic side started coming out, and
Mhm.
I felt when I at a certain point, I guess still in my teens, but a little later, usually by your late teens, many musicians have sort of decided on a direction. If you're in a rock band, that's it. Whether you stay with that band or not, you're that type of musician,
Mhm.
or you're a jazz musician or whatever. And I had this sort of reawakening. Like I was much more interested in these other sort of more fine arts types of music
Mhm.
that were there was more like academia surrounding them, whether it was jazz or classical,
Mhm.
and just wanting to learn music on a serious level, and just I kind of felt it's not like I wanted to get away from the music I was doing. I still love that music, but I feel like there's more, and I think that
Mhm.
kind of curiosity and that knack for observation and just learning that hit me later. So I think that you can make a connection there.
Yeah, I think once you develop an interest in the learning experience itself, right? There is no stopping you from actually looking beyond what you already know, and then like in music, obviously other styles and other approaches, kind of like that's what you kind of like need to uh, or that you can utilize those to actually go beyond what you know. And because there's also like the connection with like the, as you say, like the look, but I mean like there's also obviously the sound. Like bossa
Hmm.
nova sounds very different than
Right.
metal, right? So yeah,
Very, very.
so at that point, would you say that you were still kind of like, as you started kind of like getting into other kinds of music, was it still about like getting noticed, or were you beyond that at that point?
Then I was pretty much beyond that.
Yeah.
By the way, it just got very cloudy here. It was very bright. So if you'd like some more light, I can
Yeah,
click on a
let's
light.
turn it on. Yeah,
Okay, I'll
turn
be
the
right
light on.
back.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better.
Better. Yeah. Yeah, I could barely see myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think at that point I wanted to be less noticed because I
Mhm.
think yeah, I had joined the band that would become Testament. It wasn't called Testament at the time. At 16,
Mhm.
and really very quickly went from local clubs to national clubs
Mhm.
and international clubs, and even occasional larger shows.
Mhm.
I mean, by the time we were touring Europe for the first time, I mean, I think I was 19 years old,
Oh.
and we weren't. The festivals were kind of still new, at least for those the harder music festivals. There were a few, not nearly as many as now,
Mhm.
but they were occasional ones, and we still weren't on the level to play those. But I remember there was one that Megadeth had dropped off of and couldn't make, so they needed a fill-in, and we were somebody they reached out to fill in. So we filled in at the show. I think there were two of them, and they were both stadium shows
Mhm.
on this bill with just a crazy number of bands like David Lee Roth with Steve Vai.
Mhm.
I think Iron Maiden headlined.
Mhm.
Kiss was on it. I mean, it was just a crazy lineup. A lot of European groups as well. So there were occasional shows like that, and I think so by the time I was getting more into music outside of that and just wanting to be a more diverse musician, yeah, it really wasn't much about being noticed. And in fact, I had been to a couple concerts when I was off tour where I was just so knocked out by the music
Mhm.
and there was hardly anybody there. And
Mhm.
I kind of had this realization that, you know what, I would rather be a musician like this, playing for, I don't know, less than, definitely less than 100 people. I think at this show there were probably, 10 to 30. It was, a very small place, but they were studio musicians in the San Francisco Bay Area that were
Mhm.
part of this network with Narda Michael Walden, who had moved to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Well, and he's kind of better known now as a pop producer, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. But in the 70s, he had replaced Billy Cobham in Mahavishnu Orchestra,
Mhm.
played for Jeff Beck Wire. I mean, it's just this history on the seminal fusion record. So he would hire the best musicians for his pop recordings, but a lot of them were, serious improvisers, and they would get together. And I heard about these shows from a recording engineer that we worked with, and he told me about it. And he just said, "Yeah, these are like some of the best musicians in the Bay Area." So I started going to hear these musicians, and it was just, it was just a knockout. And it was improvisation, but it was real, it was real jazz rock. I mean, they would do some standards. They would do stuff from like Weather Report and Return to Forever, but they had some originals. The keyboardist wrote a lot of original tunes. I think he probably could have been a pretty well-known guy, like a Zawinul or a Chick Corea. But he was, he had a very good life, like in the studios. So I was looking to musicians like that. These are people in the studios that are just, top level musicians, but it's not about the attention.
So I spoke with Koaro Ustici, who is a guitarist who played with Narada around that time. So
What's the
maybe he
name?
was Corrado is an Italian, Corrado
Oh, okay.
Rustici, and he was the co-producer on the Whitney Houston stuff, and he was the
Oh, okay.
guitarist.
He
So
probably played around that time. I don't
yeah,
think I saw him at those shows.
hmm
And I think not all of the musicians were in the Bay. I think he had the Bay Area musicians, but I think he would also they would do some of the recordings in L.A.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I think I know some of the musicians who probably worked with him. But
Yes. Yes. So this is interesting. So it seems to me like you, well, I mean, I know that, but I was going to say it anyway. So you are in it for the love of music, and but the way that it went for you career-wise, you kind of like had success with your first band, right? And then on top of that, like you learned what you were really into, like where you were saying, okay, it's not about like for me being successful or anything or like seen by a lot of people, but you wanted to hone your craft and you were blown away by those jazz rock people, let's say, who inspired you. And you're just like, I think you were born in 68, is that true?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you're just 4 years older than I am. So I have sort of an idea which climate like you grew up in. Obviously, like the States, very different from Europe, but so when you said like you were 19 when you had your first like international tours,
Yeah,
that is
that's right.
that's kind of insane. I mean, like, can you do you under well, probably you can explain why do you think Testament it was called Testament then, right? When you were touring.
By the time we were touring, yes.
Yeah, okay, okay. So Testament was why were you guys so successful? I mean, did you guys really was it just luck or did you guys play a lot, practice a lot? Did you guys have a vision? Was there like one person in the band that had a vision, or how did it come together?
Well, I think part of it was luck,
Hmm
but we were just part of this whole scene of heavy bands in the Bay
hmm
Area.
hmm
And by the time I joined the band, I was looking for a band. I just realized, like, band leadership is not my skill. Like,
hmm hmm
maybe I'll develop that one day, but I just don't have that. Especially at that time, I did not have that personality. I was super quiet,
hmm
and I was just unsure about the process. Like,
hmm
how does that work? So I had already like thought in my head I should join an existing band, and I was just kind of keeping an eye out for bands, and then sure enough, almost like clockwork, like it was meant to happen. Somebody told me that this band needs a guitar player, and I was aware of the band because they were pretty new band still, but they were getting shows
hmm
for new bands at the time. Like Slayer was actually a new band at this point,
hmm
mid
hmm
'80s. They came to the San Francisco Bay Area, up from Southern California, and I think second or third show, the band opened up, and friends would tell me about him. I didn't catch that show. I had seen the very first Slayer show in the
Mhm.
Bay Area, so that was which was pretty cool. Um, but I think a big part of it was you had one band that was just off to the races already. So, and that band is Metallica, and they weren't like the level they are now. I mean, now they're mentioned alongside Bruce Springsteen and
Yeah.
U2. You know?
Yeah.
That nobody ever would have imagined that, but still, they were like really quickly things happened for them. So I think by the time I joined my band, they already had Ride the Lightning was already out, and they
Mhm.
were on a major label with Elektra. They were doing a lot of these festivals in Europe, and I guess because they had such an identity with they had relocated to the Bay Area for Cliff Burton, the
Mhm.
original bassist, and they'd already built up their following. So anyway, by this point, Metallica's like clearly rising quickly, and they're looking. There is interest. It's such a new thing. I think there was industry interest in
Mhm.
other heavy bands, and
Mhm.
especially from the Bay Area.
Mhm.
And a lot of groups signed record deals at that time. Some of them were with there were a lot of very small independent labels, and especially in Europe, there were these European labels like I remember Music for Nations was one, and yeah, it was like really quick. We were like getting offers, and we were all excited. But then we
Mhm.
we would meet with an entertainment attorney who that was one great thing about my father being this law professor. He had these connections to
Mhm.
good attorneys, and the attorney was very disappointed. He disappointed us and said, "I'm sorry, guys, these record deals are terrible. Like you're just better off not signing any of these record
Mhm.
deals."
Mhm.
But by the way, he said, and he's negotiating another deal for this label, Megaforce Records. And he said, listen, I let the head of Megaforce Records hear your demo tape. I just wanted his opinion. What does he think of it? And he actually really likes it,
Mhm.
and wants to talk about possibly recording you guys for Megaforce Records. So Megaforce had been Metallica's first
I see.
record label,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they actually managed Anthrax, who was already on their way at that point. They had a couple albums, and they were in the process of getting a distribution deal with a major label.
Mhm.
So I think we were helped by the fact that we signed with this label, this indie label that was so associated with Metallica, and we didn't sign the first contract we got, which we wanted to. I think a lot of bands did. I think that actually hurt some of the other bands, and they turned out to have this distribution deal with Atlantic Records. So
Mhm.
a few albums in, the distribution deal expired, and they had a bit of a falling out between Megaforce and Atlantic Records. And by that time, we were doing well enough so that Atlantic Records actually had the option to choose some bands to go directly on Atlantic Records,
Mhm.
and Testament was one of the bands. So it was kind of this, series of unplanned events that wouldn't happen again if you tried to do it, if you tried to redo it. And I think that's often how it is. I
Yeah.
mean, I've heard so many industry stories. Like,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was aware of metal at that time, and I had like also this. sense, like as a 12-year-old, right, that there was a movement, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of like what it felt like. But now you've kind of explained to me how that actually worked on the level of the bands, and makes total sense that being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, you kind of like get, drawn into that world. And so the other guys in the band were older than you back then?
Yes, yeah, they were all like early 20s,
Okay, okay.
so they had
And
finished school, had jobs. It was different places in life, but luckily they liked my playing, and as long as I could do a rehearsal or two a week, and an occasional gig, that was fine.
I'm curious. So, when you first joined that band and you were the guitarist, or like were there two guitarists in the band?
It's two guitarists. Yeah, it
Two,
was
two
actually
guitarists.
founded by the other guitarist, Eric
Okay,
Peterson.
okay. So what was your role initially as second guitarist or first guitarist? Was there any talk about that? I mean, were you involved in any writing from the very beginning, or did you have to learn
Yeah.
songs first at that?
Well, they had about a half a dozen songs, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and pretty much almost all of them ended up on the first album
That's
too.
right. Yeah.
And you can really hear a difference too, because the influence of those songs it's very clear. It's Motorhead,
Okay.
it's Slayer, because Slayer was already
Mm-hmm.
doing albums at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of other stuff, but I would say it kind of had a really fast, almost like garage band, feel to it. That's where the
Mm-hmm.
Motorhead thing comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Just driving, mostly one key.
Mm-hmm.
And the first song I brought in was like, these Iron Maiden style twin harmonies
Uh-huh.
with, different modes that they'd never used before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big change. So you
Mm-hmm.
can tell about just under half of the songs on the first record that there's a lot of harmony, a lot of single note parts which
Mm-hmm.
weren't there before, some key changes. So I really tried to make it musical. Some of the ideas I brought in were more in the style of like Ozzy Osbourne
Mm-hmm.
and Iron Maiden, uh, but the tempo would just have to speed up. It was just so a lot of those
Fascinating.
ideas, yeah, they were changed once we started working together on them.
So, before joining that band that became Testament, were you had you written any songs before that, or riffs, or were you like when did you start being a
Yeah,
composer?
because I had tried to put together a few different bands, and it just
Hmm.
never worked. There weren't as many musicians at my school.
Hmm.
Some were starting, but most hadn't played very long. It's very different from today because now we have this culture of you know kids playing instruments, joining bands where they're still little kids, and
Hmm.
you see
Hmm.
them on YouTube and everything, and it's
Hmm.
great. But it wasn't like that. I mean, it was actually pretty rare that I had started guitar at 10, and was I still had a long way to go, but I was pretty good for my age, and it was definitely good enough to be playing in one of these local bands. So I had tried with a couple other kids at school, and I just felt like it was just a mismatch. They needed a few more years on their instruments. I did try with some older players, and it was okay. But it was just I think one of them was already starting another career, and wasn't going to be doing music full time, and whatever happened. But for a couple of these projects, I just had little parts laying around. They weren't complete songs, but they
Hmm.
were parts. And a bunch of these parts ended up on the First Testament album, including that one with the harmonies. It's a song called "Burnt Offerings,"
Hmm.
and yeah, a couple of the main parts in that song. I had them. I wasn't sure what to do with them,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I wasn't thinking of vocal line at that point. I did not even know how to visualize vocal lines, and wasn't focused on the other instruments. Yeah, I'm amazed by musicians who are like multi instrumentalists, and
Hmm.
yeah, like Eddie Van Halen could just
Hmm.
put together a whole song, all the parts, play the drum parts.
Hmm.
Prince, it's probably the best example.
Yes.
Like not an instrument he couldn't play. I I couldn't have imagined that. So I was just really guitar focused. Later on, of course, I realized, okay, I need to have a bass.
Hmm.
I need to play a little bass sometimes. I need to play, at least have a rudimentary knowledge of a keyboard.
Yeah.
And I'm okay now. I'm not performance level, but I have moments where you might hear me and think I'm a piano player.
One aspect about this initial drive to get to know and get to love music and becoming a composer, for me, that was around the age of, started at around 10, but it really started to take like full force between 12 and 14 or something. And
Uh-huh.
now sometimes I still find myself, like just even recently, just 3 years ago with Stickman, bringing in a piece into the band that I had the idea for when I was 13 or something, which is
Oh
so
wow,
ridiculous.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible that like sometimes these ideas they sort of like simmer, right?
Right.
And they are waiting for the right time to come alive. And like I was kind of like shocked. I had never um imagined that this would ever find a form, and especially with Stickman, like. But anyway, so that's why I'm asking, that's why I'm interested in how these things go for other people, other
Yeah.
musicians who have dedicated their life to music.
Well, at 13, what was the instrument you composed that piece
It
on?
was even before I play guitar.
Uh,
Like I started like at 6 with like playing recorder,
uh,
stuff like that, and I played mandolin
oh, great. Cool
between
instrument.
8 or 9 years old and 15,
Uh-huh.
and so, but it was actually a keyboard. Yeah, like my parents bought me like a small Yamaha with like small keys when I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
when I was
I have
10,
them.
and
Those are
yeah,
great. Yeah.
yes, and that's when I started kind of exploring harmony and stuff,
Yeah.
and that's where the first musical and harmonic ideas kind of appeared, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me it was and I then fell in love with a friend's acoustic guitar, which was a
Mm-hmm.
nylon string, and I
Mm-hmm.
had my first classical guitar lesson when I was 15. So did you play a classical guitar at all?
No, I never did. And that's one thing I would, if I could do it over, I would probably study classical guitar, at least on some level.
Hmm.
I just didn't. It seemed so. I mean, I definitely had an appreciation for it. It just seemed so different.
Hmm.
The instrument, the size of the spacing of the strings, the
Yeah.
technique.
Hmm.
But it is great, and in recent years I've been doing more parts where I need fingers, or at least like fingers in hybrid, where I'm choosing different notes. And I guess my harmonic knowledge is much higher now.
Hmm.
So I can definitely use more of that. The playing of intervals and things that classical technique could be a help with. And I'll work on little parts here and there, but I definitely appreciate it now today than I did when I was younger.
Yeah. And I agree. It's a completely different instrument in a way. It's just the fact that you have access to all 6 strings at the same time
Yeah,
with your right hand makes all the difference, like, you
hmm
know. And
that's amazing.
so were you when you started at 10 years old, did you have a teacher or did you just grab a guitar? Have you, you know, do you remember, did you use a pick from the very beginning or how did that go?
Yeah, I used a pick from the beginning. So I was lucky to have a really good teacher who was good with kids,
Hmm.
and he was a folk musician.
Oh, mhm.
And yeah, one of the first things I learned was how to hold a pick. The music I liked, and I was talking about this with Tim,
Mhm.
was the songs that were simple for a child to understand, right? Like
Mhm. Mhm.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock, right?
Yeah.
We all live in a yellow submarine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here comes the sun. It's like all great songs.
Yes.
So when I learned guitar, that these types of songs were really what I learned. And
Mhm.
my teacher, he was very good at making connections with these songs.
Mhm.
Because really, like "Rock Around the Clock" is a blues. You
Mhm.
know, a lot of Elvis tunes are blues.
Mhm.
Even blues form, if not
Yes.
the blues genre.
Mhm.
And I, at that point, my gateway to heavy rock and roll was Kiss. They were
Mhm.
like superheroes, and
Mhm.
this guy was great. My teacher, he really even found like some of that blues connection in Kiss, certain
Mhm.
Kiss songs. There's a song called "Let Me Go Rock and Roll,"
Mhm.
and I think it's probably inspired by Led Zeppelin rock and roll.
Mhm.
It's the same type of thing, like an up tempo kind of tune, follows the blues, but it has a riff based on like a classic early rock and roll riff.
Mhm.
And my teacher, his name is Gary LePeau, he would make that connection, and he would say, this is very close to Chuck Berry.
Mhm.
And I was a huge fan of Chuck Berry because I saw him in a movie, and I just was knocked out.
Mhm.
And it turned out that he had influenced everybody. Once I started reading about the Stones and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, everybody was influenced by Chuck Berry, and I had no idea. I had just seen him in this film and just been gotten excited. But yeah, there are so many connections. So my first teacher Gary, he would make that connection between Chuck Berry and Kiss and the Beatles, and even other songs that I wasn't even aware of. Like he would point out that the Beach Boys song "Surfin' USA" is basically the same song as Chuck Berry's "Sweet Little 16,"
Mhm.
and started making connections in that sense as well.
That's pretty amazing. You know, I think
Yeah.
that the best teachers they let you experience these connections or like the historical associations of like, yeah, you have a chord sequence here that's very much like the blues form, and but then there is like a little riff that like the Led Zeppelin thing that is a little like a folk song from Ireland or
Mm-hmm.
and like all of these, yeah. And it's certainly a very good way, you know, as a teacher to spark creativity in children if they sort of like start thinking that way and understanding where the modules they work with, you know, like come from. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
so.
and it certainly influenced how I would teach later on in life too.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
it's all about connections, and I might make a connection that you could take a song like Ozzy Osbourne, "Goodbye to Romance," especially because I've taught a lot of guitarists over the years that they're more familiar with hard rock and heavy metal. So
Hmm.
Ozzy Osbourne, "Goodbye to Romance," everybody knows that.
Hmm.
Well, would you ever make the connection between Billy Joel And the Billy Joel song Piano Man, it's actually the same progression,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is the same progression as All the Young Dudes by
Mhm.
David Bowie, most
Mhm.
famous version by Mott the Hoople,
Mhm.
and numerous other songs. There's like an Elton John song that does the same thing, and it's really just going down the major scale system.
Yes.
It's just it's just a descending scale in each chord of the scale, and then resolving, and then a melody written on top of that.
Mhm.
And that's really how I started to understand music theory, and students have seemed to really appreciate that because everybody's got that sound in their head that you know whether you know those songs or not, you know some song that does that,
Mhm.
and the and it outlines the whole system, and then
Mhm.
from there you can start to pick uh, other chords to start on and find other songs that's okay, this is just like this song, and this one's just like this song, and then it starts to make sense. But I think for me, it really helped just learning to hear all that. I figured out that I learn better that way. And I had these books, I had these transcription books, and I would just get tired reading them. I wasn't, I was like, what is, like, this is just not making me want to play.
Mhm.
Music itself makes me want to play. So I
Mhm.
kind of, but I also realized I need to be able to understand this at a basic level, the written music. I don't need to be able to sight read at Carnegie Hall. I don't need to be like that level of under. But I do need to be able to write a chart.
Mhm.
This is of course after I was getting into more serious music and realized, okay, if I want to work with the musicians that are more trained in either
Mhm.
jazz or classical or some kind of written, that's how you communicate with the chart.
Mhm. So in Testament, did you guys write down anything?
Nothing, nothing.
Nothing.
I've I've made a lot of jokes about that. Just that was partly what inspired me to really get it together as far as like being able to write a chart, because the process, I just think it's so slowed down by trying to describe what you're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I
the
mean, like especially if you and I know that you were not in the band for many years, right?
yeah,
And then you came back to it, and sometimes I know that can be a real pain in the neck, trying to remember what one played, right?
oh yeah, yeah, and by that point, I mean I've learned to just accept whatever situation I'm in,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it can be really funny, because I can find myself in a room with musicians like Adam Holtman from
Hmm.
Steve
Yeah.
Wilson and Miles Davis and Mark Egan from Pat Metheny. We
Hmm.
all played on this with Jane Gedder, who's a great musician, and it's like there's charts,
Hmm.
and we're going to take it from measure 54, and then we're going to take a coda at C or whatever, and these are players. They mostly do that. So when I go to those rehearsals, I drink a cup of coffee. I'm on my toes. I pay close attention. I don't. I studied the chart a little before. Just to be, you have to be on it. And it,
Hmm.
it it just moves so fast. It's just a matter of keeping up. Whereas, I go back to my old band and the rehearsals. It's like we're gonna take it from this part, like verbalizing it.
Yeah, yeah.
where he goes, yeah,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
then
there's
I've
it's
heard
just a
these.
different kind of language, in a way.
Yes,
And I just think that in the process of creating music, it can be that's when it really shows that if you don't have the musical language, let's say, then things can take a long time to get sorted
yeah.
out because, you know, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've heard whole conversations. Play this. No. That's not what you did. No, I did. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I get, and so when that in, I just have to get used to that. And but also I try to help those situations too. I just
Mhm.
like, okay, this is how it is.
Mhm.
I try to help by like recording. Like, okay, I think he means this part right here. Okay, but it's a very different process.
Yeah,
That's
let me tell you a little story out of my from my life. Like,
uh,
you know, the being in a band where then suddenly people say, "Oh, this sounds so wrong," or something is like, I don't know, it doesn't sound good, it doesn't sound good.
uh,
And it was actually the bass player was a half step off
oh
of the
my
root
god.
note. And that's all it was. Like, but
Woo.
nobody figured it out. Well, for me, it was
Wow.
absolutely obvious, right? But but it's
Wow.
just funny, then
Yeah.
like this whole process starts like, oh, something doesn't sound good, right? Like,
Yeah. What could it be?
I just found it very funny,
Yeah.
and I still find it funny.
Well, that can be deceptive too because the bass it's such a low
Yeah,
frequency
yeah, exactly.
and it sounds fine with the notes the patterns he's playing,
Yes.
but somehow, yeah, something about the whole thing is just like clashing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's really funny.
yeah.
And I think another thing it's caused me to get better at bringing in my own ideas and demoing, which is much more possible today than
Hmm.
it was when I started. Like when I started, the best home recording situation, if you weren't a successful professional musician like Eddie Van Halen with his 5150, that's not most people.
Yeah.
The best thing was, they had these little multi-track recorders that
Hmm.
on cassettes, and I had one of those. It was called the Porta One, and yeah, I did a bunch of. I would demo as best I could, but even then it was very limited. It's a cassette. It's only 4 tracks. It's you can sort of capture the raw idea, but you have to explain. Oh, okay, no, it's gonna sound good actually. And now we have laptops with the same software that's used in studios,
Hmm.
and we can record with the same gear that we use live. I mean, it doesn't. If it's a digital amp, it's not. I don't need a wall of stacked Marshall amplifiers anymore to get that sound. I can just take a digital amp like the Kemper, which is the one I use,
Hmm.
and just run that through Pro Tools or Logic. I have Logic and
Hmm.
drum programming and play the bass. I'm able to come up with parts that some I've played some of my demos for people, and I'm asked, who did you get to play drums? Who's playing? Yeah, and that that's all done at home. Yeah, so it's just a much better way to to present an idea. Like,
Hmm.
here's the riff. It sounds pretty. Maybe it doesn't sound like the album, but it sounds pretty good for a demo,
Hmm.
and it's a good blueprint for what it is.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
in the past, somebody might not like a potentially very good idea just because it sounds terrible because it's on a cassette. And luckily, we don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah, and that's what I found difficult in the analog days, right? Writing with a band, where like if it was sort of like a democratic process, where not everybody was equal, right? Like maybe somebody was able to present something in a more
Sure.
convincing way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't really about the musical idea. It was more about how to, get it across. And yeah, that has changed, but at the same time, like, we can also think like maybe, back then you had to have more imagination, like just to
Yeah.
kind of like, you know, and yeah. So for me, interestingly enough, I don't think I've ever made a demo of a song or a piece in my life, because like once I start working, it becomes the real thing somehow.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, like even if things get replaced later, but like I've never demoed anything. Um,
Yeah. I think it depends on the project, and
for
it
sure.
depends
Yeah,
on yeah what it's for. But
yeah, yeah.
if I'm writing something to present to Testament,
Hmm.
well, of course the drums are going to be replaced. I'm using the software
Yeah,
by Tune Track,
yeah.
and it sounds pretty good. And there
It's
are
good.
there
Yeah,
are albums out where people are using that,
yeah,
but yeah, there's just nothing like a real drummer,
yeah.
and it's going to go through changes too. By the with the band,
Hmm.
it's gonna sound different. So even though I've been with the band, I was with the band early on. I'm very identified with it. I still didn't start the band, so I still don't have final say on a lot of stuff. And
Hmm. Hmm.
my ideas, they have to be approved by Eric, who founded the band, and
Hmm.
he may change the tempo. Depending on how attached I am to the idea, I may resist, or more often than not, I'll go along with it. There was one song on the most recent album, though. I was, resistant. I just said that's all I care about. I want this tempo. I don't want to mess with it. And everybody agrees now it was the right decision, but
Hmm.
the instinct there is to just speed everything up, and I don't think that's always the good thing to do.
So when did you leave the band? In the 90s?
Early '90s, yeah,
Yeah.
like '93, I believe.
Hmm. And that was the, I mean, what kind of phase of your life started then once you've left the band? Once you had left the band?
It was very. It's kind of like, not that I would call it like a lost period, but it was very like a period of searching.
Hmm.
Yeah, like sort of like a reawakening in a way,
Hmm.
because there's this idea that okay, you're going to leave the band, everything's going to fall into place somehow, and things did not fall into place. Like
Hmm.
suddenly, the value of being somebody from a band of this genre, was just very limiting, even
Hmm.
in the rock world, because at that point, the tastes were changing,
Yeah.
and even groups from Seattle and that whole movement were sort of seen as the new heavy rock music, but it also had this appeal way beyond heavy rockers. It was actually reaching mainstream audiences,
Hmm.
and yeah, the heavier bands were really just being cast aside. Guitar solos were going out of favor.
Hmm.
You know, it was said to be, you know, the end. Shred is dead was the expression. It was so silly. I mean, just completely ridiculous.
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, what do I do? I am the ex member of this band, and I could either do more music like that, try to put a band together like that. But I didn't want to do that. I knew I wanted to expand and do other stuff. I was also afraid of sort of losing the visibility that I built up. So I think I tried frantically to put bands together. I must have put like a half a dozen different bands together, and they just, you know, and the experience was good. I suppose I needed that experience and sort of learned how to. I guess I learned what I was looking. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew what I wasn't looking for.
Mhm.
And I also came to the realization that I need to just take time away. So it took a few years before I realized that, but I just realized, okay, I need to like change my location. You know, because I've
Mhm.
been in the San Francisco Bay Area, surrounded by people I'd known my whole life, and in music, I was just around the same people all the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
And going visiting New York, at this point, my parents had temporarily relocated to my father taking a position in New York,
Mhm.
and so I would come out to visit, and I would meet up with musicians in New York, and I got excited, and I was
Mhm.
going
Mhm.
to small jazz guitar shows, and just meeting all these jazz guitarists, and they would not being who weren't judgmental of the fact that I come from heavy metal.
Mhm.
It was just very accepting, and I was just, you know, learn, and it all led to me relocating, taking a few years off, and not knowing what was going to happen. I just said, you know, the worst thing that could happen is I will get better. I will
Mhm.
be a better player. I will be a better composer, and I don't care. I was just so done with the music industry.
Mhm.
Not because I had this traumatic experience. You know, I wasn't one of these people. I never had to file for bankruptcy or anything. I know plenty of musicians who have.
Mhm.
But you know, just seeing that, it's like, okay, thrash metal is not popular anymore. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
grunge is, you know, join a grunge band. You know, and I saw all these musicians like chasing that. You know, they'd been playing heavy metal before. Now they were getting the proper haircuts and trying to look like they could fit in a Nirvana video, and I just, this is so ridiculous. Like, this is not what music's about.
Yeah, sorry for laughing about this.
No, no, it's hilarious. And I focused on the types of shows like I was talking about with very few people, but just
Mhm.
great players.
Mhm.
And I just thought this I could really be happy like playing for hardly anybody, but really creating something, creating music that feels worthwhile. And I
Mhm.
don't care who else thinks it's worthwhile. Like, as long as I think it's worth, and anybody else who agrees with me is going to be worth, you know, playing for.
Mhm.
So I really, yeah, I just decided to throw out all commercial considerations. I thought maybe I'll just, you know, be an educator. I'll be like a music educator. I had this experience with this band, and you know, I
Mhm.
could talk about that.
Mhm.
I'll be a writer, write about that experience. Writer, music educator. You know, play small venues, and it was fine. I was happy.
Mhm.
But well, you know what? I think also what happens when you get to that place, where, you know, you just have no, you know, no more dams left to give. You know, to put it nicely.
So it was
Yeah.
a pretty long process of, say, some sort of inner revolution that you went through then in the 90s.
Yes, the '90s were a strange time. So
And just because I always want to come back to actually the your relationship with the instrument, right, with the
mhm.
guitar. Was the guitar always your friend, let's say? Like, or was there a time when you kind of like lost contact even with the guitar? Or were you used, let's say, like some people would say they used that time, where they were confused, let's say, to
Right.
practice and they would practice all day and stuff like that. I mean, how was that for you? When did you woodshed?
Well, I did, but it changed. It
Mm-hmm.
changed.
Mm-hmm.
I started to feel really limited. It had more to do with the type of guitar than the
Uh,
guitar itself.
mm-hmm.
So I had been with the company Ibanez Guitars
Mm-hmm.
and was kind of known for this. I liked the guitars, but they were these sort of thin modern
Yeah.
guitars. They were very different from say a Les Paul or a hollow body, and just I started realizing that okay, I'm just so limited by just playing these thin guitars. So I
Mm-hmm.
started playing more acoustic.
Mm-hmm.
I got some steel strings. I got this Guild steel string that I still have. It's not really my main guitar anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
I think a big turning point was playing the decision to start playing a hollow body guitar much of the time,
Mm-hmm.
which just has a more natural dynamic, which is
Mm-hmm.
a big challenge. When you're used
Yeah.
to distortion and
Yeah.
effects, to be able to play clean and warm, chord melodies and just to play something interesting unaccompanied.
Yeah.
That was a major challenge. It's just not something that comes up when you're in a band, when you're spending years in a heavy rock band. You
Mm-hmm.
always have the band to, the background of the band. So, yeah, I made a deal with myself. I bought a Gibson L5 from the '70s. It was like at the time it was the most expensive guitar I bought.
Mm-hmm.
Not exorbitantly expensive today, but they're. I mean, it's a beautiful guitar, and I still have it. But I decided that guitar is going to go back. If it's going to go back to the store, I'm going to get rid of it if I don't pull it together as far as playing jazz guitar on a professional level.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely had the relationship with the guitar, but the types of guitar changed. I remember a friend of mine actually reminded me of this. I'd completely forgotten, but one of the reasons I stopped playing Ibanez guitars was I think they were so focused on me as the thrash guy. They basically said, so you're the thrash metal musician. These are the guitars
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna play. And I had wanted one of their hollow body guitars. They make these nice George Benson guitars,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't even let me have one.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was just like, thinking, okay, this one guitar that I played, I know they sold some guitars because of it, because people to this day tell me, oh, they bought this type of red Ibanez because I had one,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't, yeah, they wouldn't even let me play one of these George Benson. So I was just okay. They're not. This is not a situation that is supportive of my growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I started buying my own guitars, and that
So was that still in the Bay Area when you bought the
at
L5?
this time, yeah, this was in the Bay Area. This was probably a
Mm-hmm.
couple years before I moved,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, eventually I got connected with Heritage Guitars. I had actually. It's so funny because I bought a Heritage guitar as a backup. Once I realized I was moving to New York, which was a very short time after I'd gotten this L5, I realized, all right, I don't want to be going all over the streets of New York in a gig bag with this valuable guitar. So I
Hmm.
need another guitar. And the guy at the shop was just a huge believer in this company, Heritage, that had been started by, and he was like almost like overly aggressive about it, but they were they were great guitars, and he would just say, "I'll put these against any guitars, you know, they're
Hmm.
better than Gibson." I asked him, "What if I want to return it?" And he said, "Looked at me, looked at me. There was this silence. No one ever returned to Heritage." Anyway, so fast forward, I made this change. I changed locations. I stopped caring about commercial considerations, and during that time, I learned the project that would become my trio, my main instrumental project, formed,
Hmm.
and just led to my first recording under my own name. And it got I was getting contacted by jazz radio stations, and it got mentioned. Billboard did a piece on it.
Hmm.
Downbeat, like it was crazy. So it was like I needed to come to this. I needed to shed my old life in a way,
Hmm. Hmm.
and just change some belief belief systems, and just focus on the art, which was really all that. It's pretty simple when you think about it. And then all these very prophetic things happening. So the company Heritage Guitars finds out I'm playing a Heritage, and they reached out and they want to build me a signature guitar. The same company this guy wouldn't shut up about. Now they're tracking me down, and they made my first signature guitar. Um, the Alex Skolnick Heritage model. I eventually had to leave Heritage Guitars, which I felt bad about because I still love the guitars, but they're just too small. And
Hmm.
then I end up rejoining Testament, and then I need more guitars, and they can't make them. And they can make like one guitar for me a year,
Hmm.
and then I link up with ESP. But I was very firm. I'm like, I just don't want to repeat that Ibanez experience. It's like I
Hmm.
play lots of different guitars, and they were great. They said we will design the guitar with you.
Hmm.
You can play any guitar you want.
Hmm.
We see you as this all-around player. We don't just see you as the guy from town. And it was great. So
Hmm.
it was interesting. So I kind of came full circle. I did come back to Testament, but the band had evolved a lot at that point. It was yeah, I think they'd learned they'd been through a lot of stuff while I was away too. A lot of normal band drama, members leaving, coming and going. And also, by the time I came back, I was established enough to, not just be locked into that. So it's been fun. I mean, I've been back like
Alex,
twice as long as from the first time around.
yeah, Alex, I have to say it's a pretty amazing story because yeah, you're probably aware of it, but not many people manage to as you say, shed that old life and
Yeah.
start over with like embracing the totality of who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then reconnect with the old life and
Yeah.
turn that into something positive, right? That's really quite something. And so just and when you said that Heritage Guitars contacted you, that's where I was thinking, oh, in a way you've come full circle there, and like you have sort of you've stood for what you wanted to do, and then you got recognition for that, even as you said, with your first album under your own name, which is it's great. Which year was that? That was still in the 90s, right? Your first.
No, I didn't record an album of my own all through the '90s. I think it really
Oh,
it's
okay.
interesting. It really took about 10 years to get to the point
Okay.
where I felt ready to do an album. It was 2003, the first,
Okay.
or maybe,
Okay.
maybe late 2002, the first
Okay.
trio album came out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I've done several since, and yeah, and I've learned a lot since then.
Yeah.
But that was yeah, that was you know, an extraordinary thing. Just realize, okay, I can do this. I can envision a project. And now
Hmm.
it seems so simple, right? It's an album, it's a CD, and you get it. It's this finished package, but not everybody appreciates how much work goes into those things, right? Like
Yes.
every
Hmm.
song is a lot of work. So it's this
Hmm.
group of songs, and then they have to all fit together, and
Hmm.
the the planning, and just yeah, learning how to do that. Because when I was with Testament, we just it everything was happening so fast. It was the time period where you needed an album out pretty much every year,
Hmm.
which is just crazy. Right? There were like these kind of year-long album cycles, and you needed the next album to survive in the music industry for your record label to give you tour support, so you could
Hmm.
support yourself and hopefully put some away to kind of survive when you're off tour.
Hmm.
It it was rough. I mean, it was really intense. So just learning how to create an album by myself. Um, I mean, not with other people, but um, overseeing it and
Hmm.
making the decisions, and learning like who how to ask for whose advice to listen to, whose advice not to listen to. That it took a long time,
Hmm.
but at one time it was unimaginable, and it was pretty rare for if somebody is from a band like Testament, for them to do anything outside of the band, especially outside of the genre. And
Hmm.
those who did their own music, usually it was like the same type of music, but maybe just with other people.
Yeah.
And I got asked a lot, like, why don't you do like a heavy album that Testament fans will like, but it's instrumental. It'll
Hmm.
be like a Joe Satriani type thing, except metal,
Yeah.
fast. And I
Hmm.
just thought about it. I got an offer to do. I've actually had a couple offers to do these from record labels. I just like that is not. It just doesn't feel right. It's not how I
Hmm.
want to present myself. I'm
Hmm.
sorry.
Hmm. Yeah, like Leonardo Pavkovich, he actually made me record an album that features me as a lead player,
Uh huh.
which I never wanted to do. And he kind of like made me do that and actually turned out to be a great album. So I'm
Oh, that's
happy
great.
I'm happy I did it, but
Yeah. Sometimes you
well,
need those voices. Yeah.
yes,
And somebody
yes.
like Leo, who's just so connected to music and just such a big appreciator
Yeah.
of the music. Yeah, he'll be able to have these ideas in ways that we won't have. Sometimes it
Yeah.
has to come from a listener.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So what I find fascinating also about your career here and your life is that musically you seem to be getting freer and freer, right, with what you're
Yeah.
doing. And like like I did work on the album that you recorded with Percy and Kenny and Tim, but
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
and
Yeah, it's great.
and it's pretty awesome playing, right? Like from everybody, but I mean, especially from you also, because like it's interesting. Like your voice there is so. I really mean it. It's kind of yeah, like unique, and you don't hear any influences in it. And I mean that in the best way possible.
Oh, thank you.
Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like somebody trying to play like somebody else or somebody coming from metal or whatever. Like it doesn't sound like that at all. It's just a musician, right? And it happens to be you, right? And that is pretty fascinating. And so this is this. this context of complete free playing or free improvisation, is that relatively new to you, or is that something that you incorporated in your more jazz oriented bands already?
It's I guess doing a whole set like
Hmm. Hmm.
that is that free is relatively new.
Okay.
I've definitely had moments like that,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I think in the past it would happen, say, either as an intro to a
Hmm.
song, or maybe we finished the song, but we
Hmm.
haven't hit the last note yet,
Hmm.
and if I'm with my trio and we're just getting creative, and just suddenly it develops into this free, experimental thing. We've had some moments like that,
Hmm.
but it's never planned,
Hmm.
and I never thought about doing a whole set like that. The other thing, kind of similar to that, was I did some recordings with Michael Manring and Tim
Hmm.
Alexander for a
Hmm.
project called Attention Deficit. But that never played live.
Hmm.
That was all. I mean, we jammed together, but it was in the studio, and
Hmm.
then everything was constructed, and that was a different time too. I just feel like I've come so much further along as a musician since then.
Hmm.
People like those records, and it's great. And every now and then I'll hear some of it, and I say, okay, yeah, this is some cool stuff here. But
Hmm.
I was working within my limitations then, and
Hmm.
expanding as best I could. And now there's the limitations are just much less, and I have a lot more tools to work with too, just as far as different you know how to, whether it's noise or even a different type of groove, or how to interact with another musician. So the way this project came out, it would not have been the same a number of years ago.
Hmm. Yeah, so it must be pretty exciting to have this as a potential future outlet, to keep playing within that world, I think. I mean, for me, it's been like amazing to I was able to always able to do both, like completely free and written music. And to me, the two, they kind of like there's some sort of cross whatever that word is. And
Cross
pollinization.
pollination. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just amazing. And like, like this uh then when I'm playing a written piece, I'm trying to get the feel of the improvised way into playing the written piece and the other way around. And it's wonderful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to you guys playing more together. And the album will be out pretty soon, I think. The
I mean, to
album.
me, it validates everything that we were talking about. You know,
Yeah.
here it is, 2021, and I'm able to play in this improvised project with these
Hmm.
incredible musicians. With one of them, Percy Jones, who I was listening to back then.
Hmm.
As I was expanding, somebody referred me to Brand X, so you should listen to this stuff, and yeah, there it is. That's why. That's partly, that's just the latest reason why. But I mean, there's been so many projects, and yeah, and I think if I had just said, oh, I'm just the guy from the heavy metal band, and I'm just gonna either just do that band, or do other bands like that, or play only with musicians from that scene. I mean, more power to you if you're happy doing that. But I think part of the problem was I was so inspired, and I just felt like this really deep connection
Hmm.
when I would hear great improvising musicians, and I had a number of sort of experiences hearing live music at concerts that just knocking me out. I mean, there were the studio musicians I was talking about,
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny too because one of my favorite guitar players from that scene of the studio was a guy. His name's Steph Burns,
Hmm.
and he was looking to do more rock and roll. So he was kind of coming from this more jazz rock
Hmm.
place,
Hmm.
and he ended up being one of the guitarists in the Alice Cooper band in the '90s.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and then moved to Italy,
Hmm.
and he plays with this pop superstar. Vasco Rossi is his name, but
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
in Italy he's bigger than you know Elton John and McCartney. I mean, he's like that
Hmm.
level.
Yes.
And so it's so interesting, like watching his journey. But I remember concerts with him, and one of the other musicians ended up on television. She became a percussionist, vocalist on one of the late night shows, the Tonight Show, actually. And some of the other concerts that I saw, like the more well known musicians, I mean, I would maybe not super well known, but definitely in sort of the jazz rock world. Like I remember seeing Trilok Gurtu, the
Hmm.
percussionist.
Hmm.
I saw McLaughlin in a really small room for McLaughlin. I think it was with Trilok Gurtu.
Hmm.
I saw one of the last Joe Zawinul tours. But, I
Me
mean, I
too.
guess, yeah, I guess he was around maybe 5 or 10 years longer. But I didn't know. Yeah, this was like the late '90s, and
Hmm.
wow, what a knockout! And
Hmm.
just right, every type of music from all over the world, just no unclassifiable. I remember his show was very like life changing because it was just like you can't classify this,
Hmm.
right? You can't commercialize this. This is, but it's incredible. Like no, everybody in that room was knocked out, and it was like almost a religious experience. Like this is wonderful, but if you try to present this to so and so at this record label, you know, good luck. You know?
You,
So
I don't know if you're still in contact with with Gary, your old guitar teacher back then when you were 10 or something, but he would be very proud of you because what you're doing is you're making all of these connections, right? On a
yeah, yeah. God, I need to see if he's still around. I did the last time I spoke to him was like in the '90s. So I
okay.
did see him, and I was already kind of in guitar magazines, and he knew I'd succeeded as a professional musician,
Uh-huh.
and he was proud. But I think he'd be interested to see what's going on now.
Yeah, it's funny because talking to you has sort of like reactivated some memories in me as well about my path, and also this sort of wish that I have to connect uh, well and to connect people. Not necessarily, I don't need to be involved even, it's like for me
Yeah,
it's I'm happy if I can bring people together and if I can bring opinions together or styles of music together, or like if I can get a famous rock guitarist to play on an experimental uh, record and stuff like that. I've always done something like that. Yeah,
yeah.
I feel there's a lot of positivity in making connections, and especially if it's across cultures and tastes, and like
Well,
I was
yeah, that's what matters. I think
yeah,
is
yeah,
the connection and the music and the just the feel it. If you're feeling, if it leads to music that we are feeling and that we
yeah,
uh, that as players and folks like Leo who are genuine appreciators of the music, even if they don't play. that we all agree upon. This is worthwhile.
Hmm.
That's what matters.
Yes.
Not the other stuff. Occasionally, if somebody has a, you know, somebody can have a hit that, the band Snarky Puppy, for example. Like, it's
Hmm.
amazing what's happened with them, and it's
Hmm.
just great, incredibly well played music.
Hmm.
But somehow it struck a chord, and it's managed to have this industry success, which is
Yes.
amazing. So occasionally you have those stories, but more often than not, it's a much smaller audience than the commercial crowd. But
Hmm.
that's fine, because that's not why we do it.
Yes. Alex, thank you so much. I promised you to stop at around 90 minutes, so let's do that. And I'm really
Okay, it's a good
hoping
note to
that
end on. Yeah,
yes,
we could obviously talk all day.
I know, and but let's. I hope that I get to see you in August, which I think Leo is planning. So
Yeah, yeah, that would be amazing.
let's see. Yes.
Let's plan
Um,
on that.
okay. So
Great, man.
thank you very
Thanks, man.
much.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for your help with the recording as well.
Of
I'm
course,
so excited.
I love it.
Can't wait for that to come out. So.
Yeah. Okay,
Cool.
Alex.
All right, Marcus. Great
Take
talking to
care.
you.
Yeah. See you
Okay,
soon.
you
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.